September 19, 2025, marked a turning point in North American trade policy when an unexpected image shook the scene. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum together in Mexico City, signing a strategic agreement that deliberately excluded the United States. While Trump celebrated his new tariffs with a fiery speech about making Mexico submit and shutting off the tap to Canada, two of his closest neighbors were consolidating an unprecedented alliance that some experts describe as a parallel NAFTA, but with a troubling twist. This time, the goal was not to collaborate with Washington, but to contain it. In a move that surprised even the most seasoned diplomatic circles, Canada and Mexico sealed a pact covering trade, energy, and security just as U.S. tariffs reached levels unseen since 1943, with an average rate of 11.6%. While the White House bet on a divide-and-conquer strategy seeking to pit its neighbors against each other, the opposite emerged: a united front against Trump's economic policy. The Canadian press interpreted this agreement as a sovereignty shield, while in Mexico it was celebrated as an active defense against U.S. unpredictability. Critics argue that Washington, by unilaterally tightening its policies, accelerated a regional reorganization that could leave it isolated on its own continent. International relations experts point out that what began as a trade retaliation is transforming into a profound redesign of the North American economic order. The most alarming aspect for many in the United States is that this change is happening without firing a single bullet, only through agreements signed in offices and data that speaks for itself. Canada and Mexico's retaliations arrived swiftly. 25% tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, automobiles, and steel left goods stranded at ports without destinations. Meanwhile, U.S. economic intelligence agencies warned that over 400,000 jobs could be at risk if this cycle of sanctions continues. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Carney had already begun dismantling his country's old economic dependence to the south. After the 25% tariff on Canadian cars was imposed in March, Carney publicly declared that the relationship with the United States was over. It was not just a political statement, but a roadmap for the future, reducing dependence on an increasingly unpredictable trading partner. And what was the reaction of the Canadian people? An Angus Reid poll in September revealed that 62% of citizens supported this new direction. Thus, what seemed like a passing conflict is becoming a real turning point in global trade policy. Meanwhile, in the United States, the agricultural and industrial sectors are beginning to feel the weight of these decisions not as abstract debates in Washington, but as unpaid bills in middle-class homes. Do you think these policies are truly protecting American workers, or are they increasing pressure on families? Share your opinion in the comments. Your perspective is crucial in this debate. As American families face higher prices and fewer job opportunities, Canada and Mexico are accelerating their structural reorganization. Under Carney's leadership, Ottawa has launched an ambitious diversification plan involving redirecting up to $38.4 billion in energy exports to Europe and Asia, leaving behind decades of dependence on the U.S. market. New pipeline projects and export terminals are being built to connect Alberta's resources directly with strategic markets in India and Northeast Asia. But the most disruptive aspect is not the infrastructure itself, but what it symbolizes: a deliberate break from U.S. control over the continent's energy flows. At the same time, in the South, Mexico is adopting its own strategic stance. Far from seeking refuge from Washington's trade threats, Claudia Sheinbaum's government is using the tension as leverage to redefine its regional role. With exports to Asia increasing since 2024, Mexico has found an open path in the Pacific to transform its Veracruz and Manzanillo ports into transit hubs for Canadian products. In other words, while the United States imposes barriers, Mexico is becoming a bridge. Cooperation between the two countries not only boosts the flow of energy and agricultural products, but also lays the foundation for an economic corridor that intentionally excludes the United States. Some experts already call this phenomenon a soft barrier, a non-military form of protection built through strategic agreements, logistical networks, and trade diplomacy. A clear example is the joint statement in Baja California, where both governments announced the creation of a new port specialized in exporting Canadian liquefied natural gas to Asia. Mexico thus positions itself as a key hub, while Canada gains independence, all while Washington struggles to mitigate the consequences of its own policies. According to projections from the International Monetary Fund, by February 2025, economic retaliations from Canada and Mexico could reduce the U.S. gross domestic product by up to $75 billion in the medium term. In high-risk scenarios, a 2.1% contraction in the economy is estimated for 2026, along with a 12% drop in manufacturing output. In short, the measures intended to protect domestic employment are having the opposite effect. What was presented as a defense of the labor market is, according to Costa Rican economists, becoming the largest tax hike of the generation, disguised as trade policy. Meanwhile, Wall Street is not standing still. After the announcement of the first tariff measures, the Dow Jones Index lost 8% in just 3 weeks, wiping out billions in market value. American families, far from benefiting, now face an extra inflation of between 1.3 and 1.8 percentage points, eroding any gains in wages or promised tax reliefs. Critics of these strategies suggest that this is not a well-thought-out defense but a self-inflicted collapse. This situation will determine whether the United States strengthens its position in global trade or ends up at a disadvantage against rivals like China and Europe. We want to hear your opinion. The debate starts with you. With each passing day, the influence of the new alliance between Canada and Mexico not only strengthens but begins to shift the balance of power in North America. What was once a system dominated by Washington now faces a restructuring in which its closest neighbors design their own rules with autonomy and strategy. A clear example is the bilateral security agreement signed between Ottawa and Mexico City, which includes direct customs information exchange and coordination in the fight against transnational crime, deliberately excluding the United States. This move, although technical in appearance, represents a radical change. For the first time in decades, these two regional powers are creating cooperation mechanisms without involving Washington. This is not just about sovereignty but a functional redesign of how power structures and logistics operate on the continent. The world has taken note. The European Union and Japan have already sent exploratory delegations to evaluate ways to integrate or collaborate with this new network. For them, this alliance represents a valuable asset in an increasingly uncertain and volatile world. In the business sphere, the reaction has been swift. Multinationals on both sides of the border are reconfiguring their supply chains. In sectors such as pharmaceuticals, strategic minerals, and agricultural products, networks are being developed that completely avoid U.S. territory. Some experts anticipate that energy equipment and advanced technology manufacturers will be next to adapt. We are not simply witnessing a trade exchange. We are witnessing the emergence of a new industrial ecosystem. According to an expert from the Brookings Institution, what was initially perceived as a passing reaction to tariffs imposed by Trump now reveals itself as a conscious tactic to limit Washington's ability to impose its dominance. This poses a significant challenge. Can the United States continue to be the guiding force of the continent when its partners have chosen different paths? This question is fundamental. For many years, both Mexico and Canada were considered secondary allies within the North American economic framework. However, today those secondary allies are forming consultative spaces that meet every 6 months, where the United States does not even have a seat or a voice. From a strategic perspective, this represents an unprecedented loss of control. Despite this, the official narrative in the White House continues to defend that these measures protect American workers. But do they really safeguard their interests, or are they generating an economic storm capable of destabilizing the entire system? While Washington repeats familiar formulas, new rules are being written in Mexico City and Ottawa. And one thing is clear in this new stage. Attempts to dominate trade no longer work as before. They now provoke unexpected resistance, unconventional alliances, and consequences that Washington cannot manage. For some, this represents a bold step toward economic security. For others, it is a risky move. What do you think about this intense political debate? Leave your comment and join the conversation. As the repercussions accumulate, what began as a pressure strategy from Washington has become a turning point for the entire region. The consolidated alliance between Canada and Mexico has not only withstood the blows of U.S. tariffs but has transformed the tension into an opportunity to reinvent their future. Currently, both countries are developing energy corridors, security agreements, and new trade routes that no longer revolve around the United States, but instead surround, challenge, and in many cases, replace it. For American citizens, this situation represents a clash with reality, while the political rhetoric in the White House continues to promise protection and greatness. The tangible effects are reflected in closed factories, higher supermarket prices, and family savings that dwindle amid persistent inflation. What is most surprising is that these difficulties do not come from an external enemy, but from internal decisions that, according to experts, have opened the door to a reordering of economic power on the continent. The figures are striking. 400,000 jobs at risk, $75 billion potentially lost from the gross domestic product, and a projected contraction of 2.1% for the year 2026. These numbers would have once signified a global crisis, but today are read as the inevitable cost of tariff policy taken to the extreme. Critics in Washington warn that this situation not only undermines the confidence of its traditional partners, but also accelerates Europe and Asia's approach toward Canada and Mexico, further weakening the U.S.'s leadership position in international trade. The outlook that unfolds is, according to some analysts, the most dramatic in generations. A continent where the United States ceases to be the center to become just another player, with less capacity to dictate rules and a greater need to adapt to decisions made elsewhere. The big question is how the American electorate will react when they perceive that the protection narrative translates into a direct cost to their wallets. At the end of the day, it is not just about macroeconomic figures, but about farmers who cannot sell their products, automotive plant workers facing layoffs, and families who must pay more for the same basic grocery basket. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico continue strengthening their cooperation. The semi-annual consultation mechanism that excludes the United States is more than a simple diplomatic gesture. It is a clear sign that the continent is moving toward a new order. This order, far from being temporary, could become the pillar of a parallel regional structure, backed by international actors seeking stability amid global uncertainty. For American citizens, this is an uncomfortable moment of reflection. Has this bet been worth it? Has anything real been gained, or has influence, markets, and trust only been lost? Experts agree that what is at stake is not just the present, but the role the United States will occupy in the future of the global economy. The alliance between Canada and Mexico can be considered a laboratory for what is to come. Regional blocs seeking autonomy in the face of Washington's volatility, and marking the start of an era where power is distributed more equitably. In this context, the real question is not whether the United States can recover, but whether it will manage to adapt to a world where it is no longer the undisputed center. Do you think these tariff policies are really securing the American economy, or are they only accelerating its isolation in an increasingly interconnected world? Share your opinion in the comments. Your opinion plays a fundamental role in this conversation.